Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 781st New Social Environment. I'm Carolyn, the A Programs Associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Minerva Cuevas and Yasmeen Siddiqui. We are thrilled to welcome poet Eloisa Amezcua here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter, and that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we are speaking from. And now to introduce today's guest and host. Through the intervention of images and objects of daily consumption, Minerva Cuevas invites us to rethink the role corporations play in food production and the management of natural resources. Employing irony and humor, Cuevas's practice encompasses a wide range of media, including painting, video, sculpture, photography, and installation, through which she investigates the politics and power structures that underlie specific social and economic ties. In 2004, she was recipient of the Grant for Media Art of the Foundation of Lower Saxony at the Edith-Russ-Haus, among other recognitions. Cuevas lives and works in Mexico City. Editor and writer Yasmeen Siddiqui is the founding director of the nonprofit press Minerva Projects and a communications manager at the National Academy of Design. Her practice is an overarching commitment to testing perceptions of either specific artists or existing art movements through the synchronized interplay of writing and exhibition making. Siddiqui's articles and essays are published by Phaidon, Samsung Art Museum, among many others. Thank you all so much for being here today, and I'll turn it over to you, Yasmeen.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction and for inviting me to guide this conversation with Minerva about a really strikingly interesting exhibition with so much room for discussion. And I had the privilege of attending a talk there on the weekend. And so I feel like, really set in certain ways, and I'll bring up some of those topics. But thank you, Minerva, for engaging in this conversation. So what we're going to do today is, over the course of just under an hour, kind of touch on 4 broad themes that I think are quite intriguing and noticeable within this show in particular. So so that you know where you're going, there are these ideas of the lexical, which connects to syntax, art historical, the role of art history in the show, and then kind of the quotidian, the pedestrian, and finally in the space of memory, that I think is like a very interesting aspect of this. So Minerva, can we show the slides? Great. Okay, so this wonderful, oh boy, yes, there we go, perfect. So the show is called, as we see, In Gods We Trust, and this first image is immediately upon entry. So for those who haven't had the chance to see it yet, the palette, the tonality, the whiteness of the show is something we will talk about. And this title, can we start actually before I dig into this? Minerva, how did you come upon the title, In Gods We Trust?
Well, hello everyone. Thanks for being here, joining the conversation. The title came at the very last moment. I was already worrying about how to title the show. Of course, it had to be connected to my research. Initially, I came to New York for a site visit, and I was interested in going around Wall Street. And I imagined that the exhibition was going to be very much about the history of Wall Street. And then I changed a little bit the connection of the works to a more specific history of the oil companies and banking related to the Rockefeller family. So at the end stage, when I needed to title the show, well, I remember this initial research and the question of money, and of course the sentence that we all read in the US currency. And as I was making references to very broad diversity of gods in terms of the pre-Hispanic characters I'm using, and even the reference to Diego Rivera, who is main reference for Mexican muralism. To me, it was at the end something connected to all these gods, or even the financial gods that we are all dependent of.
Oh, yes, no, it's very, oops. I love the multiple inroads into this title that came at the end, but came just in time. Could we flip it? Could we go in a little further into the main galleries? So, and then again, so as you can feel in these images, oh, and then again, I should have put this a little later, but immediately upon entry to your show, I was really struck by the interplay of symbols, signs, their placement, importantly, into what it is kind of at a sweep through, made me think immediately of a lexicon. And what I'm so curious to hear more about from you is what connects the forms, and you've hinted at it already with your explanation of the title, but what connects the forms that build up what I'm calling a lexicon, correct me if it's like off base, and what systems do you draw from when organizing the shapes and symbols that build, in particular, the mural works? For instance, if you go, I think you could go another slide, Carolyn, further to the trust. So you can see, so for people who haven't been in the show, that straight shot ahead, there's a mural called The Trust. And it's built up of a range of symbols. I think there's some details coming up. Do you mind? Yeah, oh, good. That's a good view. If anyone, and then you can, so does that make sense as a question? So this array of symbols, the source imagery, and how you compose them into this mural, The Trust, what I'm calling a mural.
Yeah, well, this is the main piece in the exhibition, and it was the first one I planned for the space. It connects this early research, but also connects my main interests in terms of natural resources, and how also pre-Hispanic deities were very much answering this concern about the power of natural resources. So at the end, in terms of having a lexicon, I think it's more about paying attention to the graphics that could be meaningful in the general landscape that I'm presenting. For example, the little elements that look like trees, those are in fact the numerology, the way Aztecs were writing numbers. So at the end, that connects also to a shape, like a mountain shape, but that's that comes from the stock exchange graphics. So I think it's very much paying attention to how I could arrange a composition. And of course, not every bank was part of the mural, it was very much the research that came from the reference of the Rockefeller family. And that was defined because of the mural that was destroyed at the Rockefeller Center, Diego Rivera one, and then of course the connection to communism. So that specific mural is one that was at the end repainted in the Fine Art Palace, and I kind of took one of these elements, which is the turtle you see more or less in the central area of the mural.
We can actually, there's a detail of it, I think, a little bit further. Yeah, here we come.
Yeah, so that's the only element that comes straight from this destroyed mural that now it's repainted. So little by little, it's either hints to historical situations or connections between the pre-Hispanic and the corporate. For me, at the end, it's a kind of contemporary archaeology, or even a future archaeology of these things, not even the institutions, the banking and their corporate image, to me, represents already, some kind of contemporary archaeology.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Do you mind going back up for a second, Caroline? So this idea, so these, what I find another theme, and I was going to talk about it later, but you bring it up, these temporal qualities that dovetail or parallel historical moments, the pre-Hispanic, or the, pre-Columbian, or the contemporary, the modern. These frames, I think, are fascinating and really heighten my noticing of the role of symbols of a primordial period, and I think in trying to understand how you're building up these images and the forms they're taking, and how there are these sort of almost like building a filter, a color filter when you're shooting a set or something, these layers of the stock exchange, of the natural environment, geography, create a very kind of strangely dynamic visual space. And that, so that brings me into this other question, which is with this show in particular, as I alluded to in the beginning, one of the most striking elements of it, viscerally, conceptually, perhaps ethically, is the use of white, these white monochromatic murals. During the talk on Saturday, a super astute audience member asked about this choice. And I thought it would be helpful to look at, earlier murals. If you look at, we have 3 examples that you have made. And I'd like to, so this is previous mural. If you could tell us, this one, the 3 of them, if you could give us some background about what they were and when you made them, and your decision to do something utterly so different.
Well, this one specifically was for the SF MoMA in San Francisco, and I started doing research on fire many years before it was so mediatized, this wildfires crisis in California. So this one connects very much to this research, the environmental consequences of fire repression as well. So my research was very much about the the politics around fire suppression. There are other references to industries like the mining, the coal industry, but I don't see them as different from the mural that we have now in New York, because at the end is the same kind of alchemy, apart from the let's say the landscape format. It's not images that I'm inventing, but it's more this alchemy and generating these conceptual connections between the elements. Well, in this case, of course, the Mesoamerican gods were used to somehow understand the power of natural elements. The industry ends up using also all these references to animals because of what we assume as a powerful animal, or how much our visual imaginary is also trained to associate images or situations with natural elements and power in general. No, so I don't see them as different. Maybe the use of color in the painted murals is what appears as the main contrast with the work right now. But the other reason why I didn't use color was because I decided to pay attention to the textures, to the volume, the element of sculpture, which is also introduced with the first fragmented mural at the entrance of the space. That somehow is an abstraction of what Diego Rivera painted with the visual references he decided to use, and with a lot of color. No, it's very saturated in terms of images. So for me, it was an abstraction, but also the other reason is that because if I'm understanding all this as somehow an archaeology, well, most of the pre-Hispanic remains or the sculptural works have faded already. If they had any color, it has disappeared. So it was one simple way to also have an homogeneous landscape and avoid having the color of logos in contrast with the color of the stone. I wouldn't feel like inventing the color to the pre-Hispanic pieces. No, so if I know that a certain piece is recognized by a specific characteristic, maybe I would think about it. But it was a way also to have this homogeneous landscape. And right now you can see on your screens the original Diego Rivera mural that is in the National Palace in Mexico City. So he, in this mural, represents the scene of pre-Hispanic culture, including weaving, including a reference to Quetzalcoatl that can have different representations. No, he could be a man, or he could be the feathered serpent sometimes. And that was also important in the elements I chose, the diversity and even the personalities of some of these pre-Hispanic gods, and how they are very queer. They get transformed sometimes from day to night. So yeah, it's quite interesting to explore. There are so many, more than 1,600 pre-Hispanic gods, so there is plenty to work with. But of course, in this scene, Diego also generated a very specific choice of elements, and I wanted to reflect on this, as I said, as an introduction to pre-Hispanic life, but also the element of people sculpting materials was another important thing to connect to the other mural. And also for me, this one worked as an introduction to the rest of the show.
Yeah, this is super interesting. So this part of the show is a really terrific booklet that works, again, this idea of the lexical and syntactical, but the book is very much an index, and we're provided with this image in the booklet. And Carolyn, if you could jump to the picture of the work that is, so it's on your right as you walk in. Yeah, where is it? Yes, there. And so in this, so Minerva, what I would love, really appreciate hearing more about is the decision that you made to remember this particular mural by Diego Rivera, which you've mentioned, but more importantly, what elements you chose to extract and transform. I think what you were just saying now about the difference between those other murals and your use of color, and how the sculptural, the spatial is implied through color, as opposed in contrast to these works where the sculptural and spatial is suggested by literally the form itself. So you have pulled out elements from Rivera's mural, and which ones did you pick? How did you decide which? And I hope everyone can get a sense of the range of forms.
First of all, I didn't want to decide. I wanted to depart from this abstraction. So what I took as reference were the lighted elements, or even the ones that had white, or that represented objects that somehow were already coming out of the original mural. So yeah, it was very much, let's say, like a formula, no, to only take certain elements out of it, no, the light ones, let's say. So yeah, it was very much an exercise. I even thought it was going to be a little bit more abstract, but at the end you end up, or maybe because I'm very familiar with it now, you end up recognizing the dresses or certain elements. No, well, for sure the more sculptural ones, or the character that is a fallen warrior that is separated from the main wall. Yeah, those I think are very recognizable, and a hint to continue reading the whole scene.
That's very intelligent, and the idea of wrapping it, of letting the corner hold place is fascinating. So what you're describing is the figure on the far left of this image?
Yes.
Yeah, and that was quite ingenious. And I think, so now my brain is sort of going in multiple directions. So what I would like to, so in light of this, and in light of what you've just shared around allowing what is occurring to come forward. So you have a system, a criteria for deciding what you extract or excerpt. How would you prefer that process to be? Extracting or excerpting? Excerpting.
Yeah.
How do you say that? Are they extracted or excerpted elements?
I think they are extracted. I mean, even the rest of the exhibition, you could say it kind of follows the same strategy. The heads that you see on top of these oil barrels are also taken from little ceramic objects in the Anthropology Museum in Mexico City. They can be tiny, tiny, but of course I end up paying attention also to the humorous side of these elements. Some are very meaningful. No, whenever I've used the reference to monkeys is because they relate to the way the monkey represented the mythology connected to the cultivation of cacao. And it was an important animal because it has to do with the ecology of the tree. It's monkeys, the ones that end up eating the fruit of the tree and then, well, shitting around the seeds. So they fertilize the earth and the soil, and then we have cacao. It's a Mesoamerican product, let's say, and then exported during colonization. So it's an example also to talk about these processes that have to do with economy, with natural resources, and that at the end also connect to the oil industry, because the area where cacao is cultivated by coincidence is the same one where most of the oil extraction happens in the Gulf of Mexico. So when the oil industry became more important in Mexico, in general, the rural population stopped growing cacao and ended up working for the oil industry, which changed not only the economy of the area, but also the traditions.
That's interesting. Yeah, these integrations of industry. So one question then that made me think with the scale of those heads. So if they're, it made me think about everything else. To what extent, how do you think about scale if you're, in terms of extracting elements from something, from a mural or quoting objects that you see in a museum? Is there a certain logic or an approach to either growing up or down, or how do you decide on the scale?
Well, more than a formal decision, I think it continues being conceptual, because since I started working with reliefs or more sculptural works, I realized I wasn't interested in appearance. I was much more interested in the presence of these, either the animals and of course the powerful presence of a goddess, in the center of the mural. So following this reasoning, the scale was not important. It was the presence of the object or the character in the whole space and the connection between them. So yeah, the scale was decided as a group, as a collective situation.
That's and that makes, so I when I look at it, I think of it vis-a-vis the bodily experience of being with the work, and then what kind of, it's very intriguing, the sorts of hierarchies you're suggesting through the scaling of each of these symbols and their arrangement. Could you actually, with the trust, I am very interested to learn a little bit more about the location of the goddess figure and the kneeling figure that you can't see right now in this image that's to the left.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, in terms of how do you see the what are you thinking about vis-a-vis the two of them?
Well,
Or does it not work like that at all?
Well, both are female and very important. The central one is Tlazolteotl. She's the goddess connected to regeneration, but also sexuality, and she's known to be the filth eater. No, so through eating, let's say the negative element, she generates a new situation, either in connection to people or situations. She's holding a torch that is part of one oil company. So there is an intervention there just by placing this foreign object in her hands. The other goddess on the left, she's Chalchitlique, and she's connected to water and lakes. But as I mentioned before, there are so many different deities connected to water, and sometimes the representation changes along the time or depending of the area where the piece is found. So yeah, she's connected to water, but also maybe it's meaningful as well. That is one of the pieces that was actioned recently in France, and the Mexican government was trying to stop this commercial trade of pre-Hispanic sculpture. She was sold for a lot of money, but in terms of her meaning is that not connected to water, but at the same time, of course, it represents as well a financial transaction of these pieces. What else can I say about her? Well, yeah, there are many other deities connected to water. Not Tlaloc might be the most well-known one, but I've decided to, as I mentioned before, somehow decide for what I perceived as meaningful rather than the very well-known gods. But for example, Quetzalcoatl would be a main reference in pre-Hispanic culture, and you can also see that on the shape of the serpent that is there on top of the Pegasus. That would be Quetzalcoatl, no? But already introduced in the fragmented mural at the entrance of the exhibition space.
Yes, and that recurrence of forms is really such a from this viewer's point of view, such a intriguing structure. To which point, so this, like my obsession with dictionaries and lexicons, if we could go to the flag, if we go just to the left, or that doesn't make any sense, but yeah, if you go down a little bit, yeah, that one. So what I'd like you, before we go on to the advertisements, which are just really bring this theme that you've the extraction to a head. Before we go there, I want to round out this thinking, and we can return again, but I don't want to, anyway, to this work. So, if you could describe it and think about, for me, it really felt like when I turned the corner, I felt like affirmed in my obsession around the lexical, because it felt like a point, a period, an end. And so, but I'd like to know more about your reasoning for making this work the way you did, all of its elements, the material of it, the source image, what it's dipped in, and how. And then we can maybe move on to how it connects to the arrangement of symbols throughout the show. But anyway, step one, what is it for the audience?
Do you mean the advertisement?
No, the flag.
The flag. Well, that comes from a previous series of works where I've used tar as material, and it's connected to this early research in the Gulf of Mexico. I went there with this fantasy of finding the natural oil springs, but couldn't really find something like that. I ended up collecting remains of tar that were already mixed, sand, tar, and seashells. I started covering objects that were symbolic as part of installation works. I also have a series of paintings that are dipped in tar. So in this case, it's a very meaningful object because it's the Mexican flag being covered on the green, white area, but also the emblem. The central emblem connects to the pre-Hispanic story of finding the land where the whole civilization ended up being established, but also it's a connection to a symbolic reference to death. Almost no one mentions that. It's more connected usually to the foundational history of Mexico, but it's there. But then when these other colors are covered, you end up with references either to syndicalism or the flag that workers use for the moment when they go on strike. So yeah, it connected also to labor, and the industry.
Okay, that's powerful. So labor, industry, and materiality. So then, so this, it feels very much like that it, in the context of the show, it asserts, sort of a logic and syntax to all of it. So I'm sorry, I thought I turned off the beeps. I can't believe this is still happening. So perhaps this is the perfect time to zoom in on, this, the advertisements. So they're really quite, we have a number of them here. And what I'd like to do is really think about this. Yeah, this one, for instance, sort of a sinister bravado that pours off these pages of the ads you've excerpted from, I believe, Life magazine. The content, reading them, looking at them now, is this foretelling of so much that has come to pass, that we can look at the amazing, that, the bravado of industry that boasts having the power of an avalanche, or the capacity to melt glaciers is another one. I don't know if you flip a little bit, I think there are a couple lightning bolts, which is the energy of lightning bolts. That makes sense. I think there's one there about melting glaciers. Do you see it anywhere, Carolyn? Yeah, maybe that's it. Yeah, enough to melt. Like, this is so ominous. 7 million tons of glacier, and it really, I mean, quite, for me, anyway, it had an impact. So given this, so first, in terms of this approach to making that's so consistent in your work of extracting from our environment, can you speak about your decision to frame these? And then I have a couple of other questions about them. Sorry, basically, it's a stupid question. Forget that. what I'm kind of more curious about is, when you look at contemporary advertising, are there any images and formulations that strike you as equally ominous?
Well, I started this collection, of course, because of the research I did since probably 20 years ago. And I started it with the ones that are related to the war industry, but also for me, it was shocking to see the language or the approach, how much the industry was basically saying they were fueling the war, and the language related to racism. So those were the first ones I collected, and the whole collection goes from the 40s to the 60s mainly. So yeah, war was very much the 40s, but then I could notice that the push for the domestic use of cars started a little bit later. No, the 50s is very much all this about the car culture, and then the natural elements and comparison between the industry and the big natural phenomena starts to appear towards the 60s. I couldn't believe this was an original ad. I had to look for it through hundreds of magazines. So I guess that's the interesting thing, no? Also with the collection, that I don't have to do anything to intervene. The statement is there, and it's more about bringing focus to these very specific years or moments in history.
Yeah. Are there other archives that you excavate aside from advertising?
Sorry?
Do you research through other archives besides advertising?
Yeah, all kinds. Usually I understand research as well, not going through documentation or documents or the internet. To me, it's very important to talk to people that is either living in the areas where I'm planning to have a show or produce a new artwork. Yeah, these conversations are what at the end mean research to me. But yeah, I explore all kinds of archives, no? The TV advertisements, original documents, yeah, any.
Yeah, I mean, this is yeah, it's that kind of an approach rooted in, this kind of, the terms, again, not perfect, but the interview, the engagement, or, all of these heavy-handed terms, but really looking closely and listening to what you encounter wherever you're working is so legible in your work. And in the show too, with some, so I said, I appreciated your description, your analysis of the choice to create the murals as you did, and to have this very crisp but textured exhibition. But I'd be curious to poke into it, like, more, just to think about this whitewashing, which is very powerful. The image you gave of objects, or statuary and so on, fading with time or light or through who knows what process is also interesting to me. And I'd love to think more about that down the road. So one element I'd like to, there are a couple of things I'd just like to go back to before we open this up for questions. If we could go back to the Diego Rivera piece and the extractions and reconfiguration or shifted emphasis. Are there other, so this I don't know, this engagement with an artist I find really fruitful and so important when we think about how memory and art historical knowledge how memory operates and how art history and its stories kind of recur. Are there other artists that you have examined, studied, reflected on, or that inspire you?
Well, not really. I guess my references usually come from studying other areas, no, either sociology or political theory. But in this case, it was interesting that following the connection between Mexico and New York, he was connection as well to muralism. And it's the first time I make a reference to Mexican muralism. All the painted murals that you saw during the presentation, to me, they connect much more to the strategy of advertisement and also street art. So I would say I started paying attention more to street art as a strategy, visual strategy or aesthetic strategy, and also, well, how corporations seem to be omnipresent, through advertisement. So yeah, I would say the aesthetics mainly come from those areas. The research tends to be around ecology or social issues. But yeah, in this case, he was a very good reference to connect to many things, the pre-Hispanic life through his mural, the connection to the Rockefeller history of wealth, but also all these corporations that came out of the oil industry. First it was the oil industry and then the banks, and also a connection to Mexico City because of where it's the destroyed mural placed at the moment, and this other main mural introducing pre-Hispanic life. So yeah, I would say him, and some time ago I produced one poster also based in the Siqueiros photography archive. It was an intervened design, but yeah, I would say those two are the only references to that.
Interesting. I think, yeah, then this is it. What's really with what you were just saying, which is kind of overwhelming, this idea of even with such a heroic effort, artistic effort with this original murals, and then the possibility and the fact that it is ephemeral, that it can be erased. I think that is an idea that comes through in a very powerful way with what you have created here, and again to this theme, another theme that appears off just the fact of temporality is so prevalent in this show, and I thank you for that, constructing this kind of an environment that lets these ideas pour out. So then we just have time for, I really want to, I think there are lots of questions as well. So I'll just belabor the whole lexical, syntactical, art historical erasure thing. So why don't we open it up to the floor? Because it does look like, am I wrong that there are a lot of questions?
No, yeah, well, if anybody has a question, do feel free to put it in the chat, or you can use the raise your hand function, or just turn your video on and raise your hand. But let's see, we do have one so far from GE, who I will ask the question on his behalf. So he asks, are your interventions analogous in any way to the performance of what some indigenous peoples refer to as coyote giving, that theft of trickery or of something by which can then be used to undermine the old order, making a new transmission for our collective transformation? I don't know if you want to respond to any of that, Minerva.
It sounds great. Hopefully it is. I would like to know more about the coyote giving. Well, I guess it's a strategy, and of course my political position is always there, but what I attempt to do is to bring elements and build these connections without having a final moral statement, so the work remains open enough for anyone to go through their own personal politics or political references. For example, while installing the main mural, one person from the installation team, he mentioned what he knew about Chase Bank that was in fact also connected to all the infrastructure for water in New York City. All the pipes and that kind of infrastructure was the first plan that company had as a business. So yeah, I'm learning all the time from these other ways to read the mural, and I'm always glad to witness that the work is open enough for many interpretations, and I'll do research more on this coyote giving, which sounds logical. That's it.
Great, thank you so much, Minerva. And thank you, GE, for your question. I'm going to turn it to our Director of Programs, Chloe, for the next question.
Hi, Minerva. Thank you so much for this conversation today. And thank you, Yasmeen, for those amazing questions. I do have a question. I wanted to, you talked about this idea of future archaeology, and a lot of the text about the exhibition refers to splintered narratives to get there. And the part of the work that was somewhat haunting for me is the sense of continuum it reveals. These brands use these symbols they've mined past cultural power structures for, and in the present, they perpetuate a future, a way of living with symbols that mirrors back the capitalist structures we've accepted. And I wonder if you think about your work within that continuum, because it sort of evokes the past while also evoking this uncanniness towards what we've accepted and what's sort of emerging from the life we've created and the economies we live in.
Yeah, and for sure, but at the end, they all seems like a past situation to me, either a recent past, but yeah, I think it's much easier to analyze it when you can take some distance from the content and evaluate them as well, these specific economic references. For example, I don't only use the new logos of companies, but also the old ones that are not in use anymore. So yeah, this archaeology comes and goes in between the past, present, but also very much also thinking about the future, no? And probably my latest work tends to be apocalyptic and playing a lot with these ideas of what will be inherited or what will be seen from the future, no? And I've tried to do that sometimes with not only the usual references to archaeology, but even using popular culture, no? So not only the established companies, but Disney or Pixar characters, no, that now seem contemporary, like how they would look from the future.
Yeah, and I was just really struck by the white murals because of the way they sort of get at they get at both the unseen element. You know, they're kind of they're beautiful, but they're also because they sort of appear as if emerging from the wall, it gets at sort of what's under the current of everyday life and kind of forces you to sit back and think about what exists in what's already there.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's so interesting about the color choice. And yeah, thank you so much for answering my question.
Well, I have to say that also that was the reason why I started working with murals. I've never used the digital solution for them. And that was because I could perceive that once something is painted on a wall, somehow it is understood as a historical scene. So, of course, it had this connection to advertisement or billboards, but using hand-painted solutions for them somehow grounded the ideas and the elements into this historical perception.
Amazing. Thank you so much for those answers.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chloe. We have a question from David Fuenzalida. I'm going to prompt you to unmute if you can. Otherwise, I can just ask on David's behalf. He is asking, are there any particular emotions that move your work? Is anger or any other emotions involved during the process of your work, Minerva? Thanks for your art.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure, yeah. He says, are there any particular emotions that move your work? Is anger or any other emotions involved during the process of your work?
No anger, but enjoyment. I every time I somehow respond to a specific context, I'm grateful that at the end is some kind of a learning process or my own education about so many different subjects, but also while doing this research, and as I mentioned before, the oral history being as a main part of the research, or establishing a dialogue with the people that is professional or that knows about so many different issues at the end, means also that having meeting the most interesting people around the world to talk about social issues. So I would say it's probably yes. I'm interested in social justice. I'm interested in enjoyment, humor. I always pay attention to who's gonna be the audience of the work. No, it's not a studio production. It's very much planned for every place where the works are going to be presented and the audience.
Yeah, thank you. I have a brief follow-up to that then, because the use of humor in your work is fascinating, considering you are diagnosing these real problems, but you are also transforming them or generating a new situation, like you mentioned Quetzalcoatl does. And I wonder if you would speak a bit more to the use of humor, if that's instinct or a strategy.
Yeah, for example, well, I mentioned, no, it's not only like the most well-known pre-Hispanic gods, but whenever I visit the anthropology museum, I check the pieces all around. No, I look for the funny faces, even if it's a tiny element. Check their pots, everything. I really explore like the possibilities of each piece. Apart from that, I guess humor is a super good way to communicate and generate a contrast in reference to very harsh content or terrible information. No? I mean, we are in the middle of different crisis. No, the ecological one for me might be the most important one, but of course that usually connects also to the social, and that's how I've also worked, no, in that terrain. It's never isolated ecological issues or environmentalism. No, for me, ecology comes with this the social explorations as well.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's see. Our next question's from Barbara Latansi. If you'd like to unmute, you should be able to ask.
Thank you, Minerva, for this really interesting discussion. And I have a question, and in a way, I should emphasize that your work already addresses it, but I'd just like to hear your response because I think that Aztec visual culture was so much more complex in ways that go beyond symbolisms and signifiers. What was so my question is symbolism and signifiers, like in the sense of corporate logos, that kind of thing. So for you, what was the most difficult part about resolving the complex material legacy of Aztec culture, Mayan culture, but you've mentioned Aztec culture in particular. So resolving that material legacy with the effective but actually vapid visual design of corporate signifiers. So finally, do corporate signifiers hold back your searching the dynamics, or trying to understand the dynamics of Aztec artists? So it's like I'm focusing on Aztec production as being about artists like ourselves, like yourself, where you're that they were also confronting problems, right, that they had to solve. And so and it seems like corporate logos, just like it just blows that piece of it away, because you're connecting something in deep time. And do you have any reflections about that, like where you've discovered those problems that they are trying to solve?
Well, I'm not sure I totally understand the question. But you
That's
tell
okay.
me if I'm not replying exactly to your question.
Okay.
But I would say that trying to learn about Mesoamerican cultural life is usually confusing and very imprecise, because well, as I mentioned before, these gods and goddesses can be very complex, And at the end, you are never sure you are getting the right information. Of course, a lot of elements that could have been, or objects that could have been meaningful, were destroyed during colonization. So I'm always reminded of what is missing. Also, the very particular perspectives from archaeologists and anthropologists. No, they also have their own cultural approach, but also even political direction that has been changed through time. So I would say that coming from outside the anthropology field, I'm not a professional, I try to grab information and somehow digest it through my own perception of all these different cultures. And yeah, I made the reference to the Aztec numbers, but in general, all the elements in the mural come from many different cultures in Mesoamerica. That's also that I tried to do, because yeah, apart from the Mayan and the Aztecs, it's very rare that there is a reference to the Mixtec or Olmec cultures, and most of them come from different ones. No, the main goddess in the mural, Tlazolteotl, she comes from the Toltec culture, and also the main priest that is in the exhibition space as an isolated sculpture, he also comes from the Olmec and Toltec cultures. No, that is more towards the Gulf of Mexico. So yeah, the more I try to learn, the more confused I get about all these, but that's also a good thing, I would say, about how diverse were all these deities, and how much we are still learning about these cultures. Every time there is a construction site in the center of Mexico City, there is new material coming out. No, it's this layer city from pre-Hispanic times to the colonial times, and now the modern and contemporary architecture that, yeah, it only makes me feel that there is no precise, or I mean, I end up doubting all kinds of information when I do research about pre-Hispanic life, but there are things that for sure make sense, no? Like what I mentioned about the use of the mythology around the monkeys. No, there is a very logical reason why the monkeys were seen in this pottery that was used for drinking cacao. So yeah, and the I'm not sure I mentioned it, but the way in pre-Hispanic life all these gods were also kind of useful to understand the natural phenomena, I guess would be a connection to the language of corporate actors, no, like how at the end they represent also the exploitation of all these natural resources, no, the starting with the oil industry, but yeah, in many other cases it is connected, not to these basic activities.
Great, amazing. Thank you, Barbara, for your question. Thank you so much, Minerva. Our final question today will be from our very own Fang Bui. You can go ahead and unmute, Fang.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you so much, Minerva. Thank you, Yasmeen, for this thoughtful, fascinating conversation. I'm learning so much. Yeah, and it's just a question of how we reclaim history, how history can be a boomerang I love the image of the boomerang. You throw the boomerang and it goes, it fly in the air. And it's, if you know how to control it, it always comes back to you, you know? It's so interesting in the idea of colonization or simulation. I'm from Vietnam. So the first thing I was taught is to study the history of Vietnam by memorization. It's a common practice in our culture. That's how we were able to resist the 1,000 years, hard to believe, under Chinese dominance. They were there from, you know, I think 111 BC till 8938, I think. And then after that, the French came. So the Chinese was there for over 1,000 years, and the Chinese, and then the French came around 1887, and they were kicked out after Dien Bien Phu. That was 1954. So that's 200 years. But one thing that was so interesting, listening to you all, was that the Chinese will never suppress any kind of alchemical practice, be it medicine and other form of medicinal from nature, witchcraft even, whereas the French did, which is so interesting to me. Which, you know, the idea was that, for example, take, and I go ask my question, take Benito Mussolini, even on that level, naming names or being names, so to speak. You know, all of my Italian friends don't know that his first name, Benito, is not an Italian name. After that, everybody, the Italian would name their son Benito, you know? But prior to that, it was his parents who was hardcore Socialist Party members. In fact, he was a very famous journalist writing for Avanti magazine, Milan. I collect few of those magazine. And his name was Benito because his parents were admirers of Benito Juarez. Exactly. In fact, his two little name, middle name, Andrea, which named after Andrea Costa, another great Italian socialist, and another is Amicare Cipriani. So that was his two middle name, you know, Andrea and Amicare, and then Mussolini. It's insane.
Yes.
So question is, I mean, I always curious about the notion of curandero, curandera, you know, so whether in Vietnam growing up, or even those among our friends, many of whom you probably know, your peers, you know, artists in Mexico City and elsewhere, the question of magic, the question of alchemy, shamanism is so deeply invested in our culture. And I think for the misperception or misreading and imposing Western idea of everything that can replace it is something that can be reclaimed as artists, because we believe in such idea. So my question is ultimately about healing. How does it relate to that tradition, shamanism, and your own work at the moment?
Yeah, well, I have to say as well that Benito Juarez was the first
That's right. The indigenous
indigenous president in Mexico. So that's why it's so shocking that Mussolini was named after him. Yeah, life is like that, no? Full of contradictions, but yeah, it's interesting that you know that fact. Yeah, I would say that the approach to nature in general, to the natural elements, somehow in indigenous areas comes together with a communitarian life, and shamans or curanderas having also repressed as a social practice, because of course they represent the opposite of the commodification of nature and also the pharmaceutical industry, which at the end is totally based on chemistry, but at the end comes from also plants and useful natural substances. So yeah, I'm familiar with how, especially in Latin American countries, that was repressed not only as a very specific element, not that connects to healing, but it comes with the general repression of indigenous culture. Also the language, the many different languages that exist in the area of Mesoamerica or Latin American countries, those were as well repressed. So we are not talking only about the healing practices, but culture in general, the indigenous culture, because of the importance of industry and the exploitation of natural resources in all the region. And I guess nowadays it somehow comes back in the way of already commodified solutions. It seems that, okay, at some point we need to recognize that these more natural options are better in general for not only human consumption, but also the ecology of the planet. But then they are highlighted as luxury things, like organic food. It gets to get sold in a more expensive way at the end. But yeah, I would say it is great that we pay attention back to these early practices because they were totally connected to the communitarian way of approaching nature and healing.
Yeah, thank you. That was terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation, and thank you for being who you are. And we're just going to make sure that our friends get to see your show. So thank you, Minerva.
Thank you.
Back to you, Carolyn.
Thank you, Fong. Thank you, Minerva, and all of you for your amazing questions today. Here at the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading. And today I'm so thrilled to welcome our Poet Laureate of the Day, Eloisa Amezcua, here to the stage. Eloisa Amezcua is from Arizona, the author of From the Inside Quietly, inaugural winner of the Shelter Belt Poetry Prize, selected by Ada Limon. Her second collection of poems, Fighting is Like a Wife, was published by Coffee House Press in 2022. A McDowell Fellow, Amezcua's poems and translations are published in New York Times Magazine, Poetry Magazine, and elsewhere. She serves on the faculty of Randolph College's MFA program. So thrilled to welcome you here today. Eloisa, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. And I just want to say muchísimas gracias, Minerva. Es un privilegio estar aquí contigo. I'm going to read just a couple of short poems. And these are from a new project where the speaker is in a relationship and then leaves God. He wanted to be God, so I made him mine. I left God. It felt good. I was free, but God got upset, told me I was stupid, that I made a mistake, that leaving was a mistake. I'd regret it. I left. It felt good, but God was livid. Nobody leaves God, he said I was a nobody. I left. It felt good. I thought I was free. That thought felt good. I was stupid. I was not free. Nobody leaves God. I left. It felt good until he found me. This poem takes an epigraph from the Judgment of Solomon in the Book of Kings. And we were together, there was no stranger with us in the house, save we two in the house. Imagine you are the woman, you are both women, mothers, and you are the king too, and the baby. You come to yourself crying, carrying yourself, shouting that you have tried to steal yourself from you. And you stand there accused of not being you. You, the stranger, you claiming you are yours, and you on your throne, wise and just, tell you there are two options only. Cut yourself in half. You keep one half, and you keep the other. You can never be whole again. Or choose, only one of you can keep you, whole you. You choose to cut yourself in half. You choose to give yourself up to you, to keep yourself whole. From your throne, you nod in agreement. You are who you say you are. You, the imposter. Take yourself whole. Imagine you turn to leave, walk through the giant palace gates, and again you are the woman. You are both women, mothers, and you are the king and the baby too, shouting, shouting, crying, justice, you and you and you and you. And my last poem, thank you so much for inviting me to read. Thank you to the Brooklyn Rail. Something about God and consumption. Something about God consuming me. Something about God consuming everything. A fire, a flood, soul after soul engulfed, tree after tree until all the forests are gone, the ocean gone, one drop at a time, or maybe quickly. The ocean vanishes all at once. Something about the earth as a giant desert. Something about the moon not knowing what to do if there are no tides, no currents to dictate. Something about God destroying the moon. Something about God taking everything as a lesson in the name of righteousness, in the name of God. How else would we learn but by force, through loss, vanishment, banishment, the world no longer a world, no trace of there having been, no trace of being, not a single one. Something about God cutting the earth out of the universe, a planet-shaped hole, a hollowness, a nothing. We are nothing. I am nothing. I am no thing. I am no, no, no. I am nothing. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was beautiful.
Wow, yeah, thank you, Eloisa, amazing. Everyone, please do see links to her books in the chat. Go see the show at Krimanzuto if you haven't yet. Thank you so much, Minerva and Yasmeen, for today. We would also like to thank the Terra Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program, making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel, where today's conversation will be up shortly. For the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our monthly publication and public events like our daily NSE. Please check the chat for a link to donate to support the Rail. And join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for I Miss Summer, a poetry reading curated by Ben Fama. And you can now all turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much,
that was
Minerva,
so great.
Eloisa.
Minerva.
Amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And please
Thank you,
go to the
Eloisa.
show. Thank you for the reading, Eloisa. It was
Thank
beautiful.
you. Thank you,
Thanks,
Thank you so
Eleanor.
much.
Thank
Beautiful.
you for the
Thank
beautiful
you.
reading.
Bye.
Congratulations,
Thank you.
Minerva. Thank you so much.